Thank you. At our last meeting, and this is a special town council meeting, we normally meet at the beginning of the month. At the beginning of June, we voted to take a pledge to commit to ensuring appropriate use of force policies. We wanted to make sure that our commitment to doing so was very clear. And so we are all going to sign this pledge. When I say all members of the town council, our town manager, and our chief of police. So let me read the pledge. This is our Town of Barrington Commit to Action pledge. The killings of George Floyd, Breonna Taylor, Ahmaud Arbery, and the loss of far too many Black lives have left our nation anguished and outraged. More than 1,000 people are killed by police every year, and Black people are 3 times more likely to be killed than white people. Together, we can work to redefine public safety that recognizes the humanity and dignity of every person. We therefore pledge to review the Barrington Police Department's use of force policies, to engage the Barrington community by including a diverse range of input, experiences, and stories in our review, to report the findings of the review to the Barrington community and to seek feedback, and to reform the Barrington Police Department use of force policies as necessary. And now we will each sign this pledge. Thank you. The next item on our agenda is to discuss and act on a town council statement on racism. I think all of us agree that this is going to be the beginning of a conversation, and it's going to be a long and hard road for us to move down, but we have to do it. Monday, I heard, or I guess it was Friday, I heard Greg Boyle say that we need to unravel the toxic thread of racism that is woven into the fabric of our nation. And it occurs to me that that's what makes it so difficult, because it's been here for so long. And we've all become kind of accustomed to it and part of it. We have 2 alternate statements, and I'd welcome my colleagues' input on the 2 statements, and then once we've decided on it, we can certainly read the statements into the record, or if anyone wants to read any portion of it as we're debating it, we should do so. Does anyone want to be heard on this? Vice President Weeman.
My name is Joel Urtescu.
I'm sorry, Joel. Joel, we will definitely get to you, but I wanted to answer Vice President Weymouth first.
Unless you want to have people from the public speak.
Sure.
Why don't you do that?
Joel,
I'm hoping.
go ahead.
Thank you. I'm hoping to hear both statements read in entirety so that we all can understand what's being signed and or read into the record before it's signed.
Certainly. Jacob, would you like to read your statement into the record?
Yes. The people of Barrington are calling for a more just and equitable society. Earlier this month, more than 1,200 people in Barrington stood up for Black Lives Matter, showing each other and the council that they are ready to fulfill the promise that hate has no home here. We must follow this demonstration of solidarity and preparedness with tangible actions to overcome the disparities, inequity, and suffering that are brought on by racism and prejudice. Barrington's legacy of systemic racism perpetuates both the homogeneity of our community and a culture that has been tolerant of overt racism. In the past 3 weeks alone, we know of 2 instances of overt public racism committed by young people. In the same vein, we have heard expressions of fear about those people who would move into our affordable housing. Overt displays of racism and fear of others belie deeper, more widespread biases. We have to ask ourselves, what can we do to create an environment within Barrington that reduces inequality rather than perpetuates it? Will we continue to be held back by an environment in which racism and intolerance of others thrive? Or will we learn to be proactive and take steps needed to break from our history? Inclusivity will continue to elude Barrington until we make it a hallmark of our town. The residents of Barrington have acknowledged that we must proactively combat the disenfranchisement caused by racism and prejudice. We need to learn what must be changed, then change it. The responsibility sits with those who hold power, whether it was obtained through an elected office or inherited as white privilege. By working with minority communities within Barrington and beyond, we can create policies to proactively combat racism and its legacy. We'll measure our success by the diversity of new residents, new hires in municipal, school, and private sector jobs, and in civic involvement. We'll also measure it by the absence of hate speech and by the presence of equity and empathy for all our neighbors. We will know we have achieved success when inclusivity is recognized as a hallmark of our community.
Thank you. Mr. Urtescu, this is the second statement. We, as the Town Council of Barrington, condemn the killing of George Floyd and the police brutality, which the Black community and other communities of color have endured for far too long. We grieve these acts and pledge as your elected officials to ensure this will not happen in Barrington. We are confident in the high standards of professionalism of the Barrington Police Department, and in the coming weeks and months, we intend to show our citizens why we are confident. We will describe the care used in selecting candidates for hire, as well as the extensive and constant training required by our department. Training in areas like de-escalation, unconscious bias, and working with the mentally ill. In this historic moment, however, we must do more than simply reassure our citizens about our police department. We must use this time as an opportunity for self-examination. Our police department welcomes constructive criticism, and they are always striving to improve. We must look beyond our police department and recognize that systemic racism exists across this country and that Barrington is no exception. We must make an active effort to better understand and fully recognize the racial issues in our town, state, and country. We must engage in this critical work while acknowledging white privilege and addressing the lack of diversity on our town council and advisory boards. We must engage wholeheartedly in this work with a deep commitment to racial healing in order to take steps to build the community we have long said we want to be. This work won't be completed overnight. This work will be backbreaking, emotional, and demanding for all involved. This work is also utterly necessary and long overdue. It will be especially difficult given the constraints presented by COVID-19, but just because things are more difficult does not mean we are giving up. We commit to accelerating our work to add a racial equity lens to our programs, policies, and practices as a first step towards dismantling racism as an institution. We would encourage our partners in the community to join in this effort. The Town Council also makes a simple but important commitment to you, our residents, and our businesses, particularly those of you who are people of color, that we will listen to your voices. We see you. We can and must do better. We need the community to help us shape the future of Barrington to be better than the past and the present. Please join us. Those are the two statements. Would anyone from the public like to ask a question or make a statement? I'm not seeing anyone. If anyone wants to make a statement, please. Lisa Lowenstein, please. Ms. Lowenstein.
I did also take some time to write my thoughts down, and I forwarded them to the town council, and you all can read them on your own. But I think what I need to hear in these statements is, if you go to the doctor and the doctor doesn't examine you or doesn't do blood work and doesn't listen to your heart and just looks at you and then hands you medicine, you think, how do I know what's wrong with me? And what I don't hear from the second statement, and I want to be open to, pulling everything together in the best possible sources. I hear a lot of focus on police issues. I think that, having grown up and even been stopped for speeding on New Meadow Road, I've never been treated with anything but extraordinary kindness, and actually helped in difficult situations where someone was doing something not nice to me. I think our focus has to be on not reflecting, but examining publicly the history of racism, the exact problems that we have in Barrington, why we don't have people of color who live here. And I don't, while I think it's useful to ask people, just because someone's a person of color doesn't mean they're a community builder or a psychologist or have experience in community-based policing practices. I just think that I don't hear anything in the second statement about, because we need to put together maybe 5 statements. But every statement has to start with the part, which is, where are we coming from? Who are we as a community? What's wrong with our community? And then we can talk about fixing it. But we need to have a moment of reckoning. Like, actually put names to it and identify things. There's a lot of really ugly that is here in the community, and it called out, and actually called out. That's what I want to say.
Is there anyone else who'd like to speak? Anyone from the council?
Sure.
Vice President Weymouth.
This obviously is a very difficult conversation to start. I do have concerns that as a council of 5 privileged white people, that we have to be a little concerned about coming off as being righteous, and that we as a council can fix the ills of the world, fix the ills of this town, fix the ills of this state. And we obviously can't do that. Recently, I was sent by my daughter-in-law an interview with a Black therapist and trauma specialist from Minneapolis named Resme Menniken. It's on the onbeing.org site, and I think certainly every person on this council should read, to listen to it. And he starts from the position of asking the question, diverse from what? And as he explained, when you say diversity, that means you start someplace first, and then diversity is compared to it. And it, in his terms, is equal to white body supremacy. That was hard for me to hear, but it has altered my perspective and opened me to a whole new world of looking at this issue. And I'm thinking that if we take some steps that we are able to take, dealing with the police, dealing with members of the community of color and their interaction with police, because I imagine that Ms. Lowenstein's experience with the police is very much the way mine has been. We can't know what others have experienced. And I think I would offer as a way to deal with this, something that we did as a council back in 2007, when a young man who was a rising senior was killed by a speedboat driven by a classmate on the water. And because it was in July, the schools didn't want to deal with it. And I convinced the council at the time to hire social workers who interviewed over 100 people, community members, including the victim's family, the members that were out on the water, the students that were out on the water, the class president, who happened to be my son, the chief of police, the police who dealt with that issue. And they, because they kept all the interviews of people anonymous, it made for a willingness for people to come forward and speak their experience, their concerns, their fears, and what have you. And one of the other things that I learned from Resme Menakem was that if you get people of color in a room with white people who are asking for their experiences, it is it's a way to re-traumatize the deep-seated trauma that is in every person of color from the time they're born. And so I would suggest that we begin this conversation with possibly hiring social workers of color, speak with community members, speak with the police, and any other community members that wish to be heard, and that they relate what they've learned to us. And so I'm more comfortable, that's the wrong word. I think as a first focus, we should do what the pledge actually said, which we all just signed, which was to make sure that our police are working with the entire community without prejudice. So I'm more interested in the statement, the first statement, although I do have some changes that I would like to see made.
Thank you. I do think that would be a fantastic idea as a way to approach things and try to make people comfortable sharing, so that it's not too public. Folks who want to say something about Barrington, they can feel comfortable saying it anonymously. I think that's a great idea. In terms of statements, my guess is that from talking with the people of color that I've spoken with, their view is that talk is cheap. And yet I think we still have to make a statement. I think in the absence of doing it, we have to make that statement. But I agree with you, Kate, that the most important thing will be the actions that we take, not the statements that we make. And yet at this point, I think it's important to make the statements because our silence would speak volumes if we don't. And because the commitments that we make will force us to continue down this path, even when it does become very difficult. And it's already difficult, but we've got to do it. Before we get to the changes that you made, I wanted to see if anyone else, Councilor Breyer.
The my views on these. Sorry, could everybody hear mute?
I can. Yeah.
No, I hear myself a lot in the speakers. Sorry, that's better. My views on these matters, while I Kate, the term that you shared about white body supremacy or white body privilege speaks a lot, because I do acknowledge that I benefit from white privilege, but I also base my views on these matters on my personal experiences coping with anti-Semitism my whole life, including while living here in Barrington, even as recently as a few weeks ago being confronted with hate speech. And I fully agree that talk is cheap and a statement is just a statement, but it can lay the groundwork for showing that we hold ourselves accountable to create the future that corrects past injustices. We can't change the past, and we can't make up for it, but we can ensure that it doesn't perpetuate. And I think we need to acknowledge the past that we're trying to change from, and that informed a lot of what I put into the statement that I put together, which was based on several conversations with many people over the past week, directed at really understanding how we can use this as a turning point for our town.
Thank you. Would anyone else on the council like to be heard? Joy, please. I don't think they can hear you on Zoom. Jim, do you want to just, while she's talking, share your...
I would just say both of these statements certainly reflect our best interests and those of the minority communities. I think our best statements can be one of action, and so I think that it's nice to do these pieces of paper, but I think more importantly, it's what we do on the ground. I think holding something pretty robust in the fall when school's in session, when we can include the youth of our community, every age group in our community, and opening our doors to the outside community to come in and really be a day of diversity, to really discuss deeper down than what can be written on a piece of paper. I think it's imperative that we look to our hiring practices on the town side, on the school side, on everything we as a government body can do to make sure our language is inclusive in everything, that our actions are inclusive in everything, and that our hiring is inclusive in every way. An action piece I think we could do immediately is support the governor's action, a resolution to take out the word plantation from the state of Rhode Island. I think we could, vote on a resolution to do, to back that action up at the State House. It's, hopefully moving forward. And I think communities across the state would be well served to be behind that action. And that speaks volumes. So I would just say, both of these statements work for me. I just, would rather this come from a really robust conversation to be held outside of the summer. So I think those are my thoughts on it. And if we could get a resolution, I think that would be a good and timely thing to do as the General Assembly's meeting on those bills right now. So thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you. Councilor Breyer.
I just add to that I'd, even though I wrote one and put the work in for that, I would support not issuing a statement, but just committing today to doing the work that we all agree needs to happen. And as long as we have many people on watching, if people object and certainly think that a statement is actually needed for a statement's sake, then I'm fine moving forward with one of these. But I think to what Joy and Kate have both said, rather than getting into the nitty gritty of how we're going to pass either of these statements that we all, 5 of us, agree on every word of, what we do agree on is the heart of both of them, that we need to improve things. So if nobody objects, I'll move that we pass neither statement.
Okay, a motion's been made. Is there a second?
I'll second that, but just with a comment.
Okay.
I think it's Mike, your point was well taken. That silence by itself say something that we don't want to send, the kind of message. But I think just a discussion here between what's in the statement, what people have said. We've already identified policing, hiring practices, and housing as 3 things that as a local government we can actually say with a straight face we can accomplish these types of things. And I think the statement well written, all the best sentiments are in there. I don't have any reservations about any of them, but I think they're beyond our ability to deliver on the promises that are in there. But when we say something like hiring, policing, and housing, if those are action items we can take up and carry that ball forward. Our commitment to that and the steps we take are gonna speak for themselves, and I think that's all the statement we need.
So I'm sorry, are you saying that excuse me, are you saying that you would support not having a statement?
That's right. I think if we really want to do something, we should say, we have a meeting in a month, and let's have some ideas on each of those action items: hiring, housing, policing, and let's do that instead of taking out pencils and revising language.
I agree.
Okay. Joy? My own view is that while I do think that actions speak a lot louder than words, and there are things that we can do, it's important that we condemn what's happened. And, just to taking steps to make sure that doesn't happen in Barrington. But that is just my view. So if we are ready for a vote, Vice President, how do you vote on the motion to not issue a statement?
But before the vote, could we see how the public feels? Because I know people came possibly want to, if nobody wants to speak to,
please, I would like to speak.
I would like
Hello,
to speak as well.
I would like to speak, please, if there is a chance.
I'm sorry, is that Ms. Frage?
Yes, Wafat Fresh, please.
Please, go ahead.
Thank you for giving me the time, and I really appreciate the town of Barrington for initiating this. I heard a lot of good suggestions, like hiring social workers or diverse social workers. I'm actually, I'm not here to get a job, but I am a social worker, and I consider myself diverse because I'm a light skin. However, I'm not African American. When I go to CVS in Barrington, I get followed by the staff over there, despite that I look white, but I do not feel white. And the reason I'm saying this, I know that implicit biases exist everywhere. We all have them. I have them, you have them, everyone that have them, which is normal. This is the human nature, but acting on them is the problem. And it has been happening, and it's still happening, and it's going to happen until we come up not only with a statement. The statement is great, but the statement needs to be followed by an action plan. But before we do the statement, we need to hear from the people who are affected. The same thing, let's say what happened with Hurricane Katrina. Whatever happened, happened, but there was an action plan, but the people who were affected, we did not hear from them. The same thing with racism, the same thing with implicit biases, the same thing with the affordable housing, the same thing with anything else that people are oppressed. And I'm sorry, like, I didn't mean to take a lot of time. My suggestion is, I would love if the town, I'm not a politician, I don't know how things work in the town council, but what I would love to see is some kind of formation of people who are considered diverse in the town. Sit down and talk with you guys, with the town council or with the town, and hear us out. All what we want is just hear us out. The African American, the Spanish, the Asian, the Middle Eastern, the Muslim, the Buddhist, the Jewish, the Christian, the Catholic, hear us out. Thank you.
Thank you.
I'd like to say something.
Ms. Personius, please.
Thank you. I like what I'm hearing as far as listening. I think we need to do a lot more listening. I'm born and raised in this town, moved away for a couple of years for college and to work in New York City, and then have come back. It's really the town is no more diverse by much from when I was here in grade school. We had some issues while I was a younger child as well. One thing I'd like to do to start this off, I think actions are going to speak louder than words. I agree with Councillor Hearn as far as the one thing we can do right now is to put our backing behind taking plantations off the name of the state. And that would, again, that's action, and that's something we can do right now because the House and the Senate are going to be voting on that shortly. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else want to be heard? Vice President Weymouth.
It probably should be explained that we can't actually vote on a resolution tonight, removing plantations from the title of Rhode Island because it is not on our agenda. But we are having a meeting later in July. July, what is it? 27th?
Yes.
That we could discuss and act on a resolution at that time.
That's right. And I would ask Mike Ursillo, you can just weigh in on this. We have on our agenda tonight to discuss and act on a statement of the Barrington Town Council on racism. While that's not a resolution, we certainly, I think, could include as part of that statement anything we wanted. The fact that we have draft in front of us doesn't mean that we can't make a statement, something along the lines of we fully support Governor Raimondo's efforts to remove the word plantation from the name of the state. I think that would be consistent with the Open Meetings Act. Mike, am I right?
I agree, Mike, with your assessment. You can certainly add that.
Okay. So, well, we couldn't make it into, I think, a resolution, a formal resolution. Sometimes I think a statement too is, they both carry sort of the equal weight of law, which is they're just a snapshot of the sentiment of the council. So I think we could do that tonight. Would anyone else from the public like to be heard?
I would like to voice a concern.
All right, who's speaking, please?
This is Catherine Quinn. I'm not sure if you can hear me. I don't have my camera on. I just wanted to voice a serious concern on behalf of a lot of the families of color in this community who have children in our public school system, there's an alarming amount of overt racism that is happening in our schools and that has been brought to the attention of the teachers, the principals, all the way to the superintendent by the parents of these children who have been the victims of overt racist bullying and what I would consider to be torture behavior. And those parents have expressed to me I'm sorry, I have a lot of kids here. They have expressed to me that the school system was absolutely, guys, please be quiet. I'm so sorry. The school system was absolutely unresponsive. I'm deeply concerned about the lack of anti-racism training and lack of sensitivity, to be quite honest. I think that what I've heard from families in our town of people that have been affected by this is alarming and disturbing to me. At least, at minimum, our teachers and the administrators from our school system need a serious, not a day of talking about race or exploring race. They need anti-racism training extensively, like there's 6-week courses. This is work. It's hard work. In addition, I mean, I hope.
Ms. Quinn, I think we lost you. Ms. Quinn? Okay, is there anyone else from the?
This is
Can I?
already traumatic.
Okay, we lost you for a minute. So I think what you're saying is you're concerned about the schools rehabs. That's unfortunately not something that we can really address.
Okay.
But I don't think it's something that's limited to the schools. That hasn't been my experience, that it's limited to the schools.
No, not at all. I just wanted to make sure people were aware. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else from the public? I'm sorry, I'm having a hard time seeing. Ms. Lowenstein, did you want to be heard?
I've worked with a group of young people in the run-up to this meeting who have brought their concerns to me. And as your peer age-wise and that of more close to the people on the council, I have got fewer issues with speaking in public and speaking my mind. And some of the issues that came out of the meetings with them are the fact that the school system has pervasive overt racism problems and teachers who have done not only nothing to stop the problem, but have been actively part of the problem. And this is so dismaying to me, having grown up in a town where I was othered because I was Jewish and physically attacked once over it. And I have a lot of my own stories to tell. And I think that I missed her name. A big W came up, the woman who was speaking about her experiences.
Wafa.
It's Frage, Wafa Frage.
Wafa, I think what you were talking about and what Catherine Quinn is talking about is a process that, whether it's guided by social workers, it goes back to my first comment. The only way we're going to start understanding what direction we need to go in terms of action is to have a reckoning about what's actually going on. And I think you're very sensitive to this, Mike, because you have alluded to it. Mike, the president, you've alluded to this multiple times in this conversation. And Kate, you brought up the fact that this is going to be hard and that it's uncomfortable. And I think what has to happen is there have to be multiple mechanisms. And this has to be part of the first effort, the first statement, multiple mechanisms for gathering information about what is actually going on. I invited people to this meeting tonight, people of color. They absolutely categorically did not want to come forward. And I asked people who are other friends of mine and they didn't want to come forward because it's too uncomfortable. So I think there need to be, you know, the anonymous tip line, or write into this, mail your in a you know, envelope with no return address, mail in your anecdotes. But I think the biggest thing this town has to do is start by examining where we really are on this subject. And Catherine Quinn, I'm so pleased that you spoke up, because these are the hard things to say, and it's our job as people who benefit they have time to think. Let's make a big push across town to say, everybody tell us your stories. We want 50 years of stories. We want to know. Racism isn't born overnight. It's not going to go away overnight. You have to work hard at it, but you have to know where you come from.
Yeah.
Thank you.
I agree with Lisa.
Ms. Frasier.
It's really hard to solve any problem or introduce any new initiative or program or any human rights initiative unless you really know how deep is the pain. And to get to know that, you have to hear from the folks themselves. I don't know. I mean, let's say you want to start a new program in a business. I mean, it's a bad comparison, but you need like a need assessment. You need some research to know what is going on. So, thank you.
That makes a lot of sense. I think we will have to do that. And I think Kate's idea of engaging someone who, or some people who can reach out so that we avoid the kind of problems that Lisa Lowenstein was talking about, where folks don't want to come forward. I think that's a great idea. I guess the question for tonight is, do we make a statement? Do we not make a statement? And I'm hearing that we should issue plantations. The question is, do we want to or limit it to something narrower? Jake, Councilor Breyer, please.
I would like to see us, I think, just limit it to a simple statement that supports the removal of and Providence plantations from the state name, because I think anything beyond that, and we start to get back into exactly what we include, what we don't include, and I think we do a disservice to the positive outcomes of what we want to accomplish if we get into yes, I like making this statement. No, I don't like making this statement. Because in the end, you end up talking against things that you support the values of. So I think we all seem to be in agreement that supporting the governor's executive order and Mayor Lorz's executive order, and I guess a Senate bill, but the House will hopefully be voting on it. I'm not sure when they reconvene, but yeah, I think a simple statement on remove and Providence plantations.
Okay. And for those of you who couldn't hear, Councilor Hearn was agreeing with Councilor Breyer on the simplicity of having a.
Sorry,
Okay.
it works now. And I agree that tonight we should probably forego the statements and go with a simple support of the plantations, or removal of the word plantations.
With possibly a formal resolution
Yes,
at our next meeting.
but to get the word out before the legislation gets acted on, yes.
Right.
Okay. It sounds like that motion is going to be withdrawn. The original motion was not to make any statement. That motion is withdrawn. My own view is that I think we should address the issue of police brutality, which has started this conversation. But in the interest of trying to make a unanimous statement as the town council, I'm trying to come up with the right language. The Barrington Town Council supports Governor Raimondo's executive order and urges voters to amend the Constitution to remove the word plantations from the name of our state.
Could we add and Mayor Alorz's executive action? He led this last week, issuing the first executive order, and then Governor Raimondo followed suit. And I think as a man of color, highlighting him taking that action in this way is meaningful.
You're on mute. You're on mute.
This isn't working for. I would just say that Senator Metz, who's been sponsoring this legislation for probably as long as he's been up there, has played a key role in ushering this along, and hopefully it can get over the finish line this year.
We should include his name then in the resolution.
Make a suggestion. Barrington Town Council supports the leadership of Senator Metz, Mayor Alorza, Governor Raimondo, seeking to remove the word plantations from the name of our state, and urges voters to take that action in the fall. Mary,
Did you make that motion?
if everyone's comfortable with that, yes, I'm making that motion.
I'll second that.
Motion's made and seconded. Any further discussion? Vice President Weymouth, how do you vote?
Aye.
Councilor Boyage. Aye. Councilor Breyer.
Aye.
Councilor Hearn.
Aye.
I also vote aye. Motion carries. Thank you all for your input. This is going to be a very long, I think, conversation. I think it's going to extend certainly past the fall, and I would urge you to all, as I challenged the gentleman who wrote in asking us to take steps, join us in this and help us to move forward on this. The next item on our agenda is to discuss and act on setting the date, time, and venue of the financial town meeting. For those of you who weren't clear, I'll just explain that in listening to our town solicitor, it became clear that because of the complicated interplay of laws, we were left with really two options in terms of having a financial town meeting. Because of our charter, we can't call for a referendum. And so we're left with the option of having a virtual town meeting or an in-person town meeting. Last 2 weeks ago, we voted as a council 3-2 to hold an in-person meeting. And the question becomes, where and when do we hold that meeting? But I'll certainly open it up to discussion of the council if anyone would like to be heard.
I'd like to be heard just for a minute. This morning I spoke with the deputy town clerk in Foster, who had their financial town meeting in person over the weekend. And I asked her, what did you do that worked out well? What would you have done differently? And things of that nature. She said it worked out very well. Her one suggestion was they started at 10 she said, I wish we had started at 9. They were over and done with relatively quickly. But her suggestion was, you know, it was a hot weekend and we might face that again in July. Start earlier. And what I'm thinking is if we could, and it's obviously the moderator's decision to make, but if we were to start at 9 and send the message to everyone, we stand a good chance of being done by 11. But if we're not, we'll come back at 4. And I think what that does is it solves the problem or minimizes the problem of people wanting to use the facilities, people getting hungry, thirsty, what have you, and takes them out of the heat during the worst part of the day, and maybe encourages people to avoid secret ballots, which obviously complicate distancing and things like that, which is let's show up, get our work done. We can do it relatively quickly and we can be out of here. And if we can't, we'll come back, it'll be 4 out, we'll be here at 4 or 5, whatever the hour. It's obviously a beautiful night out here right now. So that would be my only suggestion. Having spoken with her, that's what she indicated the issue was there, was just 10 o'clock was a tough time. So.
Are you suggesting that we would set a time of 9 o'clock and leave it to the moderator to suspend during the hottest part of the day if she felt it was too hot?
Right. I mean, I think we encourage it. Obviously, if it's her read that, you know, if we stick it out till 11:30, we'll be done. Well, then maybe you stay past 11. But so I think you got to play it by ear. But I think we should aim to do something like that. Again, because the facilities are going to become an issue. You're asking for a whole different set of problems with people lining up for that and cleaning and all that. And, you know, we're not going to be, you know, opening a concession stand because you have food service issues. So people get thirsty, they want to go home, they want to have lunch. I just think it makes a lot of sense to try to encourage people to get this done very quickly. And if we can't, let's try to make it as easy and comfortable for them as possible. So.
Anyone else from the council want to be heard? Councilor Breyer, please.
How many people did they say in Foster?
They had virtually, I mean, it was, I think they planned for 200 and they ended up with 75 or something. Their quorum requirements are almost not. Jamestown's is tonight, you know, and we can check in with them and see how it went there as well. They are planning for up to 200 cars, which could theoretically have twice that number of voters or more, but their capacity will be 200 cars, doing it drive-in. Foster was all drive-in at Foster, same in Jamestown.
What's the capacity if we did it here is 435, I think, ballpark?
No, so there's 16 acres here inside the fence. If you had 500 people, everyone would have 1,400 square feet to themselves. So the capacity here could be in the thousands probably. As a practical matter, I don't think we're going to approach those numbers, but like I said, everyone would have a square to themselves, 37 by 37, if you had 500 people.
37. So the largest that we've had was close to 2,600. That was outside. We have 16 acres here. Crowded. Even if we done that number, we would be able to maintain social distances. We're also our town manager. I mean, maybe Jim, you could just speak to what the plans are in terms of logistics here.
Absolutely. If we were to have it here, the plan would be to have people in the bleachers socially distanced, people bring lawn chairs, sit on the field, a dais and the tables for the town council and the school committee and the COA would be on the far side of the track. We'd have a robust speaker system that would have speaker towers that face towards the white church as well as towards the grandstand. We would also have 2 tents, 30 by 30 tents by each goalpost for our seniors to get in out of the sun or anyone with special needs. We would also have 2 broadcast frequencies that would be utilized in each of the parking lots the Victory Field parking lot would be reserved for seniors because of its proximity to the venue. But there'd also be a transmission frequency in the large high school parking lot, which would allow people that were uncomfortable coming out into the air to listen to the financial town meeting on their car speaker system and their air conditioning with their windows rolled up, and only have to leave their car if there had to be a vote. And even station observers that could, count the votes by a standing count in the parking lot.
Thank you. Would anyone from the public like to be heard on this issue? The town council is looking at the venue, time, and date for the FTM. I'm not seeing anyone. Anyone else from the council want to be heard? My suggestion.
Could I ask a question? Sorry.
Yes. Chairman Bay, please.
Hi. No need to be formal. It's Gina Bay. I just had a question I understand that you're going to have the radio frequencies available for people to listen in their cars. So how would you account for the timing to ensure that people, once we get to the voting part, to ensure that everyone has been able to make it in to do the in-person voting, and also for if they were in their cars but wanted to speak either during a public comment period or to make any type of motions for any sort of amendments, how would you?
There would be two speaker systems, two microphones, excuse me, in the playing field that would be socially distanced from everyone else. So if someone was listening on their car radio and they wanted to speak, they'd have to come into the field and speak from one of those two microphones. As far as voting goes, we would certainly voting. If it was a ballot, it would take an extended period of time, and there would be plenty of time for them to make it from the parking lot to the voting area.
Okay.
Does that answer your question?
Yeah, I just wanted to ensure that there would be enough time provided for people to be able to make it to the mic throughout the process. That, sometimes the FTMs, I remember a couple of years ago, moved fairly quickly. And so just wanted to ensure that people have that opportunity afforded to them.
Gina, I can tell you one other thing that I heard from Foster today is that they had people in the parking lots, and what they would do is they would run over to a car if someone raised their hand and had a question or a comment. And much like the governor's press conferences, a person would have a wireless mic, go over to the car, hear what the person had to say, and then repeat the comment over the wireless mic for the whole audience to hear. And so that's one option. I don't know if we've explored it, but that's the thinking in other places. These are the types of hoops they're jumping through. I think by the time we have ours, as I understand it, I think West Greenwich will have had theirs. We have Foster and then Jamestown. So we can probably get some feedback from these communities on what worked and what didn't, and try to incorporate that.
Okay, thank you.
Anyone else from the public? Ms. Rosengard, please.
I'm curious about what the cost of town meeting is likely to be.
The cost of the tents is $1,600. The cost of the speaker system and the broadcast would be $4,515.
Okay, and what about personnel to staff it?
We with all our financial town meetings, we budget for the board of canvassers and the polling people that register people in. So that's already built into the budget. We'd have to bring in, I was talking to the chief of police, probably two details, two police officers, one to monitor the senior parking lot, one to monitor the venue itself. So there'd be some cost to that. I would say that the cost for the entire thing is probably somewhere between about $8,000 is my estimate.
Okay, thank you.
Mike.
Yes, TR.
TR Remishitis. Are you looking to do infield and parking lot, or just parking lot, and then when we need to talk, walk in?
No, there would be seating in the stands at Victory Field, lawn chairs on the field at Victory Field. And for those who would not be comfortable doing that, they could stay in their cars in the main parking lot. Actually, I think they could probably stay in their cars at the senior parking lot as well. The reserving the spot over by the library for our seniors so that they can be close enough to the field.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Anyone else?
This is Pam Loria.
Yes,
So I just, and I apologize because I came in as Mr. Boyajian was speaking, but if we're going to be out in the middle of the summer in the sun, most people will be in the sun, there needs to be extra personnel for health concerns because you're going to have people that are going to get hot, overheated. There should be water available. Like, those are concerns that need to be thought about.
So Pam, it's Jim. We will have our rescue here, stationed here, vice in the station. We'll also, the boosters will have their snack bar open for the sale of water, as well as people can certainly bring their own water and cooler if they choose to.
Thank you.
Anyone else? Yes, Vice President Weymouth, please.
I think for that very reason of it being midsummer and no doubt warm, I think moving it to 9 o'clock rather than 10 is a great idea. And I also think that that possibility of a split during the day makes sense. Although I have to say, I'm beginning to feel bugs. So I wouldn't want it to go much longer than whatever time it is now, 7:30. But if we had it on that July 18th, as I understand it, is the earliest we could have it. And that's a Saturday with a rain date on Sunday. I think I'm going to make a motion to hold the FTM on July 18th, 2020, with a rain date of July 19th, 2020, at Barrington High School on Victory Field and in the parking lots, with a start time of 9 a.m.
If I could ask, if you may add an amendment to that, this being 2020, we had scheduled an alternative rain date of the following Saturday, which would be the 25th. So you'd actually have the 18th, 19th as a rain date, and then the 25th as an alternative rain date. In case we have a weekend storm and the whole weekend is taken out, we move it to the next Saturday.
I'll add that amendment.
Thank you.
A motion's been made. Is there a second?
Second.
Second made by Vice President Weymouth, seconded by Councilor Boyajian. Any further discussion?
I have a quick question from the public, if it's possible. It's Megan Douglas.
Yes, please.
I just wanted to understand so the meeting would have started at 9. What would the time start be for people coming to the meeting? Or like, what do you anticipate for pre-checking in and that kind of thing?
8 o'clock.
I think if people are there, probably.
The town clerk said she can have her canvases here and ready to go by 8.
Can I also add a question?
Yes, please.
Hi, it's Mary Thompson. My concern is split the meeting, which I understand the thought process behind. I just don't think I'd be worried you'd get a quorum in the second half of the meeting because it will be hotter and more bugs, as you were just saying, Kate. And I'd be really concerned that you would start the meeting possibly with a quorum, hopefully, have that break, and then people wouldn't return at night. It's the Saturday in July. And after the year we've had, I think people are trying to enjoy the summer as much as possible. And unfortunately, even engaged citizens might not return.
Well, that's not part of our motion. Our motion would be just to set the date, to set the time and the venue, but that was a suggestion that by Steve Boyajian that it'd be something that our moderator might want to consider. And I think it's probably the kind of thing where if it was getting very hot around noon, she might say it makes sense for us to come back in a few hours. But of course, that's really up to her.
Would you then have to you'd obviously have to check in again?
No, you wouldn't, because we would, the plan is that this is going to be a little bit like a rock concert. We'll be getting bracelets as registered voters. Once you've checked in, you'll have your bracelet, and then you can
And we're sure you can't exchange those bracelets?
Actually, the bracelets, the clerk has decided that we will go to rubber hand stamps. So like when you used to go into the nightclub, you'll get your hand stamped, and therefore when you come back, you just don't wash your hands while you're gone.
Because that's what we're encouraging right now.
But certainly if someone, if we had a second session, someone could still come to the second session and re-register if they weren't here for the morning and participate. There's no requirement to come on time.
The history has been that people show up at various times during the meeting. Sometimes a call goes out and folks see that there's an important issue that's come up, and people send word, and we don't lock the doors at any time. Some people come in later. Did that answer your question?
Sorry. Yes, thank you. I just would worry that hand sanitizer could remove the stamp. You'd have to really look into the stamps. Okay. Sorry, I'm all in the negative. I just think this is super challenging.
Yeah, they could come back in and get the hammer stamped. We just have to re-verify that they're a registered voter.
Okay. I just want to make sure that was the case. Thank you.
Anyone else from the public?
I do have a question. How, if you're planning on staying in your car, how would you check in?
You'd have to leave your car to check in and then return to your vehicle.
So you won't have someone circling the parking lots, checking them?
No.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. Motion's been made and seconded. Unless there's further discussion. Councilor Breyer.
I just wanted to ask with the FTM happening on July 18th, what's the date to, if we could just state it again, to file a motion and to file to run for Committee on Appropriations?
Meredith, do you have those dates?
Yeah, the 5 days before is July 13th, Monday, July 13th by 4 o'clock. We've already passed the 30-day mark. If the 30-day mark was to add a line item that was not within the budget, the 5-day mark is to
up or down
to make a motion, adding or subtracting 50,000 or 20%.
Any line item.
That would be for any existing line item you could add or subtract.
Right. And just for COA.
You can do that at the meeting.
Or you could also do it in advance and then, right?
Yeah.
Is there a deadline for that? Or is it July what? 13th. Okay, that's all.
And if I can add that the budget hearing is currently scheduled for July 1st at 7 p.m. and that will be done via Zoom.
Okay. All right, motion's been made and seconded.
Hold on, Mike.
Sorry. I'm sorry, did I miss my chance for a public comment? This is Erica Sevetson. I wanted to go on the record and express my concern over having this meeting having a live FTM during the heat of the day, during the pandemic, even though the governor has lifted a lot of restrictions and gave special dispensation. I know there were concerns about some members of the community feeling disenfranchised if they didn't have access to technology. but there are also a lot of concerns about disenfranchisement from people who might not want to risk their health by being exposed to possible people who possibly might be asymptomatic carriers, or just don't want to be out in the heat in the middle of the day in the summer, which is dangerous on its own. So I know you're moving forward with plans, but I do want to express some concern and disappointment that other avenues were not explored more to make sure that everybody to make sure that there was wider enfranchisement of the entire community.
Thank you. I should answer though that there was a lot of exploration. I did some research myself. Councillor Boyajian did some research on this issue. We unfortunately we disagree we don't have a unanimous council on this. My own view is that it's not technologically feasible to conduct this because everyone has to have the opportunity to make a motion to amend the budget. Everyone has to have the opportunity to vote. They have to be, they'd have to get, show their ID to get voting. I haven't seen a product that would do that. And I think we could do it if we had 6 or 8 or 10 months to get some custom solution, but the current ones don't, as far as I've seen, and no one's shown me anything. So unless there's anything else from the public?
Mike?
Yes, TR, please.
TR here. I have a question on the 30 days. Seeing since you're setting the date now, how does that 30-day time limit come into effect, seeing since you're just setting the date? Because nobody knew about the FTM date until tonight.
Well, if anyone wants to file a motion, I think we can probably evaluate that then. And we'd have to see if someone wanted to file a motion that wasn't for an existing line item. For example, someone said we needed a new, I don't know, a new vote for the fire department or something like that. That would be a new matter. Everything else is within 5 days. Peter?
Thank you.
Peter, please.
Are you referring to me or?
I thought you were trying to, I thought you were wanted to make a statement.
I can defer.
Okay.
Defer to Councilman Breyer at this point.
Councilman Breyer, please.
I think tonight's discussion would have just potentially changed the date, but in last week's newspaper, I read that it was set for July 18th. So we could change it tonight, but if it remains July 18th, it had already been set as that. So I think that answers the 30-day issue.
Okay.
So that's still not 30 days, Jacob.
Last Wednesday would have been 30 days. Okay, I'm not seeing anyone else. Vice President Weymouth, the motion's been made and seconded. How do you vote?
Aye.
Councillor Boyajian, how do you vote?
Aye.
Councillor Breyer, how do you vote?
I abstain.
And Councillor Hearn, how do you vote? Councillor Hearn votes aye. The motion, and I also vote aye. The motion carries 4 to 0 with 1 abstention. Thank you. Move on to the next item, which is to discuss and act on ordinances. This first one is just an ordinance the way that we work is we introduce an ordinance, and then at our next meeting we will have to vote on the ordinance themselves. And every year we vote on an amendment to this ordinance to allow for changes in the salaries. Do I hear a motion to introduce ordinance 2020-4, ordinance amendment to chapter 45 salaries and compensation?
So moved.
So moved.
Place this
Second.
on the July 27th agenda. It's Motion is made by Councilor Boyajian and seconded by Vice President Weymouth. Vice President Weymouth, how do you vote?
Aye.
Councilor Boyajian.
Aye.
Councilor Breyer.
Aye.
Councilor Hearn.
Aye.
And I also vote aye. The motion carries. Next item on the agenda is the public hearing on the ordinance, an amendment to repeal Chapter 170 tobacco. I'm opening the public hearing, and if someone wants to be heard on this issue, they can, but just to explain, some time ago, we voted to raise the age to buy tobacco products in Barrington to 21. There was a lawsuit filed against the town and sought an injunction and received an injunction. We filed an appeal, and unfortunately, we lost that appeal. And because of that, that ordinance is void, and we are now moving to void. Fortunately, and other events caught up with us, and we've achieved our goal in any case. Would anyone from the public like to be heard on this issue? Anyone from the council? Then closing the public hearing on this, does someone want to make a motion?
I'll make a motion to adopt 2020-12, an ordinance amendment to repeal Chapter 170 tobacco with a regret.
Second.
Made and seconded. Any further discussion? Vice President Weymouth, how do you vote?
Aye.
Councilor Boyajian.
Aye.
Councilor Breyer.
Aye.
Councilor Hearn.
Aye.
And I also vote aye. The motion carries unanimously. Thank you. The next item on our agenda is to discuss and act on a proposed charter change. One of the things that we've heard and folks have pointed out is that the alternatives presented to us are not ideal under these circumstances. No one, when they wrote the charter, thought about a pandemic and the inability to hold the normal financial town meeting. We have come up with two alternatives and voted on one. Neither of them, I think, any of us think are ideal. And it's certainly possible that at some future time, either of those could fail. Either because the technical issues that I think would happen prevent the virtual town meeting from happening, or a spike in COVID testing shows that we can't hold our virtual town meeting outside. For that reason, I'm proposing that we amend our charter to allow a kind of emergency alternative budget process in the event that we cannot hold an FTM. This is simply because the alternatives we have are not good ones in this circumstance. And we're also fortunate that we are going to be able to hold an outdoor FTM. It's possible we wouldn't be able to. So what I proposed was that the town council, in the event that there is an emergency declared by the town of Barrington and the state of Rhode Island, such that an FTM cannot be held, the town council, after receiving the report of the COA, would have the ability to approve the budget so long as it did not exceed a 2% tax increase. And that's the proposal, and I'll open it up for anyone who wants to be heard on this. Vice President Weymouth.
I've spoken with a member of the East Greenwich Town Council about our FTM and how we pass our budget. And I learned from that member that that is exactly how East Greenwich passes their budget every year. It's the town council's responsibility. But in East Greenwich, they don't have a committee on appropriations, which this member was very interested to hear that we did, and wished that they did as well. And so I think many of you know that I've never been a fan of the FTM anyway, but at the same time, I think it's an awesome responsibility for the town council to be expected to pass the budget, which would include the school budget. But I feel very comfortable with that emergency budget approval process, given the fact that we have a committee on appropriations. So I think this is, I'm in favor of this addition to the charter.
I would just, Mike, one technical change, and that would be in the proposed section 733, where it says the tax levy shall not exceed 2% of the previous year's tax levy. I think that needs to be 102%.
Yeah.
Okay. Would anyone else like to be heard? Councilor Breyer.
Yes, I think we need to have some means that allows us to remain within our charter should another situation like this come up. One thing I hope positive in terms of government comes from the pandemic is the continuation of the ability to have virtual meetings. I think it gives a lot more people access. And so I have a proposed amendment to this that presupposes that virtual meetings allowed to remain part of open government. And so that would be 731 number 3, adding in person, so that it would read, conditions are such that an FTM cannot be held in person without violating the governor's emergency orders. And then adding a number 4, conditions are such that a virtual FTM cannot be held using readily available technology. So that way, if in the future, 5 years, 10 years down the road, there was another virus and we had to close everything down, ideally by that point, we would have easy access to the technology that would allow us to safely stay home and participate. And I wouldn't want a council at that time to be bound to only be able to remain within the charter by passing the budget themselves.
My concern with that is that anyone could question the validity of a town council passed charter if we were to decide that the technology was just not there yet, and someone could say, sure, you could have done it, you could have had a custom software solution that would have provided a solution. I don't want anyone to question the validity of the budget approval process. So that's why I would be concerned about that, adding that language.
What if we were to have, rather than a vague technology readily available, it's technology that can be purchased within the budget of what the FTM was budgeted to cost that year?
Vice President Williams, please.
I'd like to speak on that in that that's assuming that a future charter review committee would decide that a virtual FTM is what this town is moving towards. And I'm not so sure that that's, you know, I'm not sure that that's the case. It might very well be, but that's assuming that we are moving towards a virtual town meeting. And it may come to the point where people realize that, you know, to get even a quorum some years is questionable. And that you know, I see this as a possibility of that this would be the way that the budget was decided with the COA. So I would be hesitant to include that in this emergency budget approval process. That's my.
So with the assumption is actually that the state continues to allow virtual meetings to take place for government purposes. We don't know. We don't know that that's going to happen. But if it didn't, then we wouldn't be able to hold the virtual town meeting. So it only comes into play if it's a legal option. And that would mean that in the future, if it is a legal option, that would have to be exhausted or prevented in order for the council to approve the budget.
I understand that, but that isn't, even if it's a legal option, doesn't mean that Barrington will move in that direction. You know, they may move in the direction of East Greenwich. They may move in a different direction. Not every town in Rhode Island, I think there are only 19 that have FTMs. Budget is decided by FTMs. Everyone else decides in a different way, presumably by the town council. And so I stand by what I said. I see this as a possible way for Barrington to move forward in how they decide their budget.
Councilor Breyer, you suggested adding language that said an in-person FTM.
Yes.
Well, I am concerned that I'm concerned that if this already presumes that we would have the option of having a virtual town council meeting, which may be, so it's not required. So we could have an in-person meeting, especially if it was limited. I just don't want to have someone later question the validity of the action of the town council by saying that we could have had a some kind of virtual town meeting when that may not be practical or possible. Councilor Hearn, please.
So I'm right now, my phone just died, so I'm Jim Cunha. So I just wanted to ask, when is our next charter review commission? Like, when is the timing for that? We know?
It's usually every 10 years, and we had one when June was president. So I would say 5 years ago.
2023 is our next one, according to our town clerk, who is the repository of all this information.
So Jim was just saying that we could call for one at any time?
Yes. Yes.
I mean, I think that we probably do need to add some kind of emergency approval process. But I do think that this is a conversation that would well belong within a charter review commission, because I think there's lots of viewpoints on the financial town meeting and how it should look down the road. And I think the technology piece is really valid. I think that we've seen technology kind of save public government during these last couple of months. So I'm hesitant to act on something that should be reviewed in kind of a much broader stroke. And I guess doing this now would help us in next June in case the world is still operating the way it is. But I'd much prefer to have this be passed to a charter review commission and not us deciding on this. But in looking at where we are right now, I do think that we probably need to put something in writing that allows us to do this approval process. So I don't know if there's, kind of a time frame that this is like a temporary thing with a real decision being made down the road. That's how I would love to have it viewed, rather than this be just something that gets absorbed into the charter.
I think that's very fair, that at some point when a charter review commission looks at this, and it doesn't have to be 2023, we could call for it in 2021. When they look at the charter as a whole, they certainly could examine this and try to come up with a better solution to that recommendation on me. Now, that wouldn't be available to be voted on until 2022, which is our next general election. So that's the only time we can change the charter. Really.
Yeah, so I guess I support this. I just want to make sure that this gets absorbed and well looked at in a charter review.
Okay.
May I?
Very, very much unlike Kate. I think it's terrible business to have a town council approve a budget, but we've seen this year that if things hadn't played out the way they have, we very well might not have had any options. We're fortunate to have two, even though I really don't like them, but they are what they are. It happens to be an election year, so I think we need to put something in place. I don't think it's an unrealistic possibility that we might be living in similar circumstances next June. So I think now's the time to do it. As imperfect as it is, it's I think it fits just right, these circumstances. I think primarily what does it for me, two things about it. One is it requires a state of emergency to be declared at the town and state level. So we know that there's no politicking going on to short circuit a budget process. It's because of a real emergency. The other thing is it's going before the voters of Barrington. So as much as it would be helpful to get input along the way from a charter review commission, it's ultimately their decision, much like the budget is. They always make it right.
One of the other points about this is that it includes a maximum of a 2% increase in taxes. I'm sure we'd all like to see limited tax increases, costs go up. The point of this, I think, is that this is an emergency situation, and so it wouldn't be the year to put the middle school, to build the middle school if you were in this circumstance. That's the kind of thing that really should go before all the voters. Limiting it to a 2% increase, I think, kind of further expresses the need that we just need to get certain things that we have to pay for. So would anyone else, Vice President Wayman, please.
I just wanted to add a further caution about jumping to the gun to put together a charter review. Because the last time there was a charter review, there were something like 23 members of the committee. And that was the year that 42 charter review amendments were put forward, which was exhausting to the voters, and didn't really accomplish much in the end. I mean, they weren't really substantive changes, and the one substantive change was denied because of an effort to deny it. So I'll make a motion to approve the alternative budget approval process
As presented and amended to include 102%.
There you go. That's the motion I make.
Okay, the motion's been made. Is there a second?
Second.
Motion's been made and seconded. Any further discussion? Okay, Vice President Weymouth, how do you vote?
Aye.
Councilor Boyajin?
Aye.
Councilor Breyer?
I'm against it, but okay with it being on the ballot, so I vote aye.
Councilor Hearn? And I also vote aye. The motion carries unanimously. I believe that's the end of our agenda. So I will
move to
accept
adjourn.
Motion to adjourn made and seconded. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Thank you all.